It happened in broad daylight, in one of the busiest airports in the world. Dr. Alyssa Grant had just stepped off a flight from Washington, D.C., dressed in a soft rose-pink blouse and tailored slacks, her posture straight, her stride confident, her presence unmistakably powerful. The pink color didn't soften her authority, it made her stand out in the sea of hurried travelers. She wasn't just another passenger at JFK International Airport. She was a senior federal agent with over 20 years of experience dismantling crime syndicates and exposing corruption. But none of that mattered. Not to the two uniformed officers who watched her from across the terminal with narrowed eyes and whispered suspicions. Not to the men who ignored her credentials, her composure, and her professionalism. All they saw was a confident black woman, dressed with elegance, walking like she belonged in places they didn't expect her to be. They didn't ask questions. They didn't follow protocol. They simply acted. In moments, Alyssa was surrounded, accused, and handcuffed, her rights ignored, her dignity challenged, her identity dismissed. And she didn't flinch, not at first. She stared at them unshaken, then spoke in a voice colder than steel. "You just made the biggest mistake of your career." What followed wasn't just an encounter, it was a reckoning. A moment that revealed how deep prejudice runs, and how dangerous it is when power goes unchecked. And it all started with a woman in pink and the ignorance of those who refused to see her for who she truly was. Officer Logan Hayes leaned against a steel pillar near the baggage claim area, arms crossed, his eyes narrowing as he watched the woman in pink move confidently through the terminal. Next to him, Officer Rick Dalton took a casual sip of his coffee, then nudged Logan with an elbow. "Two put together," Rick muttered, smirking. "Pink blouse, high-end slacks, walking like she owns the place." Logan scoffed. "Yeah, doesn't fit the profile." They didn't need to say more. It wasn't about an official profile. It was about the unspoken assumptions they carried, the ones no handbook ever spelled out, but everyone in uniform seemed to absorb with time. A black woman traveling alone, dressed with style and confidence? Something about it made them uneasy. "I say we check her out," Logan said, already pushing off the pillar. Rick didn't hesitate. "Let's see what her story is." As they approached her, Alyssa noticed the shift in atmosphere. The noise of the terminal faded into the background. Her instincts kicked in, trained over decades in law enforcement. She'd seen this before. The look in their eyes wasn't about safety, it was about power. Logan stepped in front of her. "Excuse me, ma'am, we're going to need to see some identification." Alyssa didn't flinch. "May I ask what this is about?" Rick circled around to her side, hands resting on his belt, posture casual, eyes calculating. "You just look out of place." Alyssa raised an eyebrow. "In an airport?" Logan's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, just show your ID." She opened her bag with deliberate calm, pulled out her leather wallet, and handed over both her driver's license and federal credentials. Logan took them but didn't look. Instead, he gave a half smile. "Anyone can make a fake badge," Rick said. That was the moment something shifted in Alyssa's eyes. She wasn't just insulted. She was cataloging everything, the body language, the tone, the choices. This wasn't an accident. It was a decision. And they'd made it long before they ever walked toward her. "You're making a mistake," she said evenly. Rick laughed. "We'll be the judge of that." Logan pocketed the IDs without checking them. "Turn around, ma'am. Hands behind your back." Alyssa looked at him, her expression unreadable, but her voice cut like ice. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." And yet, they still didn't hesitate. The click of metal echoed too loud in Alyssa Grant's ears as the cold steel of the handcuffs locked around her wrists. A ripple of gasps sounded from nearby passengers. Some stopped mid-stride, others slowed their pace, watching the scene unfold with confusion, even unease. Alyssa stood still, her chin lifted, her back straight, refusing to give the officers the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. Officer Logan Hayes gripped her arm firmly, guiding her to the side. "You're being detained for failure to comply with a security request." Rick Dalton followed close behind, his tone casual, as if they were handling a routine case. "Should have just played it smart, lady." Alyssa's voice remained calm, though steel ran beneath every syllable. "I showed you my credentials. I answered your questions. You chose not to see." Logan smirked. "All we saw was someone acting suspicious." "And wearing pink," Alyssa added sharply. "Is that the new marker for criminal activity?" Rick snorted. "You've got an attitude." "I have dignity," she corrected. They moved her toward a quieter corridor near the checkpoint. Alyssa's wrists ached in the cuffs, but her mind was sharper than ever, recording every second, every insult, every unjustified movement. This wasn't about protocol. This was about control, ego, bias. A security camera blinked red above them. She glanced at it deliberately. "You might want to make sure that's rolling," she said. "You're going to need it." Logan looked at her with growing annoyance, masking discomfort. He wasn't used to suspects talking like this, measured, articulate, unafraid. Something about her presence unsettled him now in a way that went deeper than the color of her skin or the confidence in her voice. There was authority in the way she held herself, even with her hands bound. Rick stepped in front of her, arms crossed. "You think you're important or something?" Alyssa met his eyes, unblinking. "I don't think. I know." Before Rick could reply, a voice called from behind them, firm, older, and commanding. "What the hell is going on here?" They turned to see a man in a Navy security jacket approaching fast. David Morales, airport operations supervisor, eyes narrowed, expression already concerned as he zeroed in on the woman in cuffs. And then, something changed in his face. "Wait, is that?" he muttered, stepping closer. Alyssa didn't speak. She didn't need to. Morales' eyes widened with recognition, and suddenly, everything began to shift. David Morales stepped closer, his brow furrowed in disbelief as he looked from the handcuffs digging into Alyssa Grant's wrists to the tense faces of Officers Logan Hayes and Rick Dalton. "Officers," he said, voice controlled but sharp, "can you explain why you've detained this woman?" Logan's response came fast, defensive. She was acting suspicious, refused to cooperate. Alyssa's eyes locked on Morales's, cool and unshaken. "I complied. I showed them both my federal ID and license. They refused to acknowledge either." Morales turned to her fully now, studying her face. The pink blouse, the unwavering posture, the unmistakable command in her tone. Suddenly, it clicked. "Wait, you're Dr. Alyssa Grant." His voice dropped, realization hitting him like a freight train. "You're with the Bureau." Logan blinked. "The what?" "The FBI," Morales snapped. "She's not just a federal agent, she's one of the highest-ranking specialists in internal affairs investigations." Rick's face contorted. "No way. That can't be." "I suggest you check her credentials, right now," Morales said, his voice like a judge passing sentence. "If you actually bothered to verify what she gave you, you'd know exactly who you just put in handcuffs." Alyssa said nothing. She didn't need to. The damage was already done, and now the reckoning was beginning. Around them, the crowd had started to grow again, some filming, some murmuring, most staring at Logan and Rick with open suspicion. Logan's radio crackled to life. "Hayes, Dalton, report immediately. We've received a complaint from the Bureau. Confirm the ID of your detainee now." The voice belonged to Captain Mitchell, their direct superior. Logan hesitated, glancing at Rick, whose face had gone pale. Morales crossed his arms. "Better hurry. Every second you delay makes this worse." With fumbling fingers, Logan finally pulled out his phone and scanned the badge number on Alyssa's credentials. The silence hung heavy as the system loaded, then hit them like a wave. Name, Dr. Alyssa Grant, position, Senior Internal Affairs Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Rick took a half step back, his throat dry. This is a mistake." "No," Alyssa said, her voice even, chilling. "You made a choice, and choices have consequences." Morales turned to the officers, his tone final. "Remove the cuffs, now." And for the first time, Logan's hands shook. The silence that followed was deafening. Officer Logan Hayes stared at the glowing screen of his phone as if it had betrayed him. Dr. Alyssa Grant, Senior Internal Affairs Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Clearance Level 4. Every word on that screen was a nail in the coffin of their arrogance. Rick Dalton hovered behind him, peering over his shoulder, his mouth ajar. "No way," he whispered, as if saying it softly would change what they were seeing. Morales didn't wait. "Unlock the cuffs, right now." Logan hesitated, but one glance at Morales' stone-cold face and the gathering crowd filming everything forced his hand. His fingers trembled as he fumbled for the key, nearly dropping it. The cuffs popped open with a metallic clack that seemed louder than a gunshot. Alyssa calmly brought her hands forward, rubbing her wrists, red marks blooming across her skin. Rick tried to salvage the moment. "Ma'am, Dr. Grant, this was all a misunderstanding." She turned to him slowly, her face unreadable, voice razor sharp. "A misunderstanding is calling someone by the wrong name. What you two did was profiling, abuse of power, and racial discrimination. Let's not insult everyone's intelligence by calling it anything less." Logan stepped forward, sweat forming at his temples. We didn't know. You thought a black woman in a pink blouse walking confidently was a threat," she cut in. "You didn't ask questions. You made assumptions. And you acted like you had the right to humiliate me because you wear a badge." A murmur rose from the onlookers. A woman nearby shook her head and muttered, "Unbelievable." Someone else whispered, "She's FBI. They cuffed an FBI agent." Rick looked around, panic settling into his bones. The cell phones, the cameras, the witnesses. His career was unraveling in real time. Morales stepped forward, addressing the officers firmly. "You're both to remain here until Captain Mitchell arrives. Don't speak to anyone. Don't touch your radios. You're now subjects of an internal review." Neither Logan nor Rick replied. Alyssa, standing taller than ever, pulled out her phone and dialed. Her voice was calm, controlled, and final. "This is Dr. Alyssa Grant. I'm reporting an incident of misconduct at JFK involving 2 officers. I need an internal affairs unit dispatched immediately." She hung up, then met Logan's eyes one last time. "I told you," she said, "you made the biggest mistake of your career." And this time, he knew she wasn't wrong. The video hit the internet less than 2 hours after Alyssa made her call. By midnight, it had already been shared over 1 million times. There she was, hands cuffed, shoulders straight, eyes unwavering. The calm strength in her voice as she exposed the officer's abuse struck a nerve. On TikTok, Instagram, X, and national news sites, the footage became a flashpoint for conversations long overdue. This is what racial profiling looks like. They cuffed a federal agent because she's black. Imagine what they do to people without power. The hashtags surged. #justice for Alyssa. #reform the badge. #racial bias is real. Inside JFK's Security Command Center, Captain Robert Mitchell stared at the surveillance feed, replaying the incident for the 3rd time, his jaw tight. He had worked in law enforcement for over 25 years. He had seen arrogance, even misconduct. But this was a PR disaster, a legal liability, and a moral stain wrapped into one. When Mitchell arrived at the scene earlier that evening, Logan and Rick stood like schoolboys waiting for detention, pale and stiff. Alyssa had remained composed and silent, speaking only when necessary and only in facts. Now, with the public outraged, Mitchell had no choice but to act swiftly. Within 24 hours, both officers were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The Department of Justice confirmed that Internal Affairs would be taking over the inquiry, citing potential civil rights violations. Alyssa declined press interviews at first, choosing instead to send a simple written statement. This incident was not unique. It is a symptom of a much deeper issue, one that affects millions whose names you'll never hear. I stood my ground not just for myself, but for them. The media ran with it. Talk shows dissected every frame of the footage. Civil rights organizations launched petitions. Protesters began gathering outside JFK, holding signs that read, "Her badge saved her. What about the rest of us?" Rick tried to keep his head down, but his name was already trending. Logan, once proud of his record, avoided phone calls from friends and family. In their eyes, they were being unfairly punished. In the eyes of the public, they had finally been seen. And Alyssa? She returned to work in Washington the next morning, calm, focused, and more resolute than ever. The system had been shaken, but she wasn't done yet. For the first time in years, Logan Hayes sat in silence with no badge clipped to his chest. Suspension paperwork still lay unopened on his kitchen table, next to a cold cup of coffee and a TV blaring yet another panel of experts dissecting the JFK incident. His name ran in the lower third like a criminal indictment, officer involved in racial profiling scandal. The walls of his apartment felt closer than usual. Framed certificates from the academy now looked less like achievements and more like relics of a misguided past. He thought about his hometown, small, quiet, overwhelmingly white. Growing up, authority had always looked like him, sounded like him. Respect was something you were given automatically, not earned. The first time he'd worked a beat in the city, he remembered feeling overwhelmed. The diversity, the pace, the sharp glares when he asked questions. Over time, suspicion became second nature. Bias wasn't taught outright, but it was absorbed drip by drip in locker room jokes, quiet nods, and what his senior officers called instinct. Rick Dalton wasn't handling things any better. He sat in the back of his pickup truck in Queens, a beer in hand, staring at nothing. His phone buzzed every few minutes, news alerts, messages from family, angry threats from strangers online. His wife had stopped talking to him after the video aired. "I didn't mean to," he told her. "We didn't know who she was." And that was the problem. They hadn't cared who she was. They had seen power where they didn't expect it. That scared them. And so they tried to strip it away. Rick remembered the way Alyssa had looked at him, not with hatred, but with absolute certainty. That unnerved him more than the public backlash. In their quiet moments now, both men were forced to confront what they'd never dared question. The system they believed protected them had also shielded their worst assumptions. Meanwhile, miles away, Alyssa reviewed early drafts of a new training initiative for federal and local agencies. It was titled, "Bias Isn't Just a Word." She circled a line she had written herself. "The badge you wear should protect others. If it only protects your comfort, you're in the wrong profession." The fallout had begun, but the real reckoning was just getting started. The hearing room at the Department of Justice was packed. Press, legal observers, civil rights representatives, and government officials filled the seats, the air thick with tension and expectation. At the center of it all sat Dr. Alyssa Grant, calm, precise, immaculately dressed, her pink blouse replaced now by a navy suit, her voice steady, unwavering. Across from her, Logan Hayes and Rick Dalton looked nothing like the officers who had once sneered with authority. Their uniforms were gone, replaced by ill-fitting suits and expressions of discomfort. Behind them, their attorney shuffled papers nervously. The gravity of the moment was not lost on anyone. Alyssa leaned into the microphone, her hands folded neatly before her. "What happened to me at JFK is not an isolated incident," she began. "It is the byproduct of a culture that encourages assumptions over facts, intimidation over dialogue, and comfort over accountability." A low murmur rippled through the room. I complied. I presented my ID, followed their directions. Yet I was deemed suspicious because I looked out of place. I ask you, what place is a black woman not allowed to exist without suspicion? She paused, letting the silence carry the weight of her words. This isn't just about two officers. It's about a system that trained them to see people like me as threats. I am here today not to ruin their careers, but to demand better from the system they swore to uphold. Mitchell, seated at the back of the room, lowered his head. The department's failure wasn't procedural, it was cultural. Next, surveillance footage was played every moment from the initial stop to the handcuffing. No sound was needed. The images spoke volumes, Alyssa standing tall, the officers circling her like predators, the moment of realization on Logan's face, the crowd gathering, the quiet storm building. When the playback ended, neither Logan nor Rick spoke. Their lawyer offered a muted statement of regret and misjudgment, but it rang hollow. The panel's decision came quickly. Both officers had violated departmental policy, federal protocol, and basic civil liberties. Termination was immediate. Further civil and criminal investigations were pending. As the hearing concluded, Alyssa stood slowly and turned to face the room. Dozens of eyes followed her, not in pity, but in recognition. She hadn't just exposed two officers, she had held a mirror up to a nation. News of the hearing's outcome spread like wildfire. Within hours, headlines across the country carried Alyssa's name not as a victim, but as a symbol of resilience, clarity, and unflinching courage. Major outlets replayed clips of her testimony. Social media platforms lit up with her words, especially one line that struck a national nerve. "I am not here to ruin careers. I am here to demand better from the system they swore to uphold." Civil rights leaders praised her for her restraint. Young activists quoted her in protest banners. Parents showed her video to their children. She became a face of reason in a debate often driven by noise. Yet through it all, Alyssa remained measured, knowing that symbolism alone would not bring reform. Meanwhile, Logan Hayes and Rick Dalton vanished from public view. Their termination was made official by the end of the week. The NYPD issued a public apology, while the Department of Justice confirmed an internal audit of security protocols nationwide. Neither officer would serve in law enforcement again. Both had been blacklisted from any position tied to public authority. Quietly, their worlds shrank, job prospects gone, reputations shredded, even their own families questioning them in ways they'd never experienced before. But Alyssa wasn't done. When the requests for interviews came in CNN, NPR, The Atlantic, she chose only one, a live town hall hosted by a nonprofit criminal justice reform group. The setting was intimate, but the message was national. Sitting on a modest stage beneath soft lights, Alyssa looked out at the diverse audience before her. Young, old, students, veterans, black, white, brown, they had all come to hear not just her story, but what would come next. "I survived that encounter," she said softly, "because I had a badge and a name that carried weight. But what happens to the people who don't?" She paused. "What happened to me happens every day to people who aren't filmed, who don't get a platform, who walk away in silence because they don't believe anyone will listen. That's what has to change." Applause rose, not thunderous, but full of conviction. Alyssa wasn't seeking fame, she was building momentum. And as she stepped off that stage, handshakes and words of thanks surrounding her, she knew. Justice had been served, but her mission had only just begun. 6 months later, the air in Washington, D.C. held the kind of weight only autumn could bring, crisp, honest, and quietly expectant. Inside the Justice Leadership Center, a sleek, glass-paneled building nestled just blocks from the Capitol, Dr. Alyssa Grant stood before a room full of young law enforcement recruits. She wore a soft gray blazer and, by deliberate choice, a pink blouse beneath it. Her voice carried not only experience but clarity, a quiet authority that needed no volume to command the room. On the screen behind her were the words, "The Badge and the Bias, Rethinking Authority in America." This was the launch of her National Training Initiative, a program developed in partnership with the Department of Justice, designed to educate incoming officers on implicit bias, de-escalation, and the social responsibility of the badge. Not just policy, not just protocol, but principle. She looked out across the rows of fresh, young faces, some eager, some skeptical. She understood that. She had once been like them, full of ideals and unaware of the systems they would soon be asked to serve and protect. "I'm not here to talk at you," she began. "I'm here to challenge you." She let the silence sit. If the badge gives you power, then your first responsibility is to know how power can corrupt even unconsciously. If you've never questioned your assumptions, this is the time. If you've never felt what it's like to be wrongly judged, then listen harder to those who have. One hand raised in the crowd, a young recruit asked, "Dr. Grant, what would you say to officers who think this kind of training is an insult? That it assumes we're all guilty before we begin?" Alyssa nodded. "I'd say growth is only possible if you're willing to be uncomfortable. The uniform doesn't make you right. The badge doesn't make you just. Your choices do." Later that evening, she stepped outside alone, the city lights of D.C. glowing across the skyline. She took a deep breath, the kind you take not at the end of a journey, but at the beginning of one. She thought back to JFK Airport, to the cold cuffs, the stares, the silence, and how she had turned that moment of violation into a mission with purpose. Justice had been served, yes, but more importantly, it had evolved. And as long as injustice lingered, so would she. This story reminds us that dignity and justice are not privileges, they are rights. Dr. Alyssa Grant's experience reveals a painful truth. Even those who serve and protect can become blind to their own biases. But her strength lies not just in her position, but in her poise, the calm refusal to be broken by injustice. For older generations who have lived through times of division, progress, and painful change, this story echoes a familiar call, that silence cannot protect us, and courage doesn't always shout, it often speaks clearly, firmly, and with purpose. The lesson here is not only for police officers or government officials, it is for every one of us who carries assumptions. We must ask, do we see people for who they are, or who we expect them to be? As we grow older, our responsibility is not to retreat from the world's injustices, but to guide the next generation toward empathy, accountability, and fairness. Because the world does not change through anger alone, it changes through example. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. See you in the next one. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. See you in the next one.